When the pause breaks and the truth spills out, it started with rain. Not the soft, romantic kind you see in movies, but the kind that pounds against the windows like impatient fists, turning the world outside into a gray blur. I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through a half-hearted list of things to do, when my phone buzzed. "David, you home?" I stared at the screen. My first thought was that he'd sent it by mistake, that it was meant for someone else. My second thought was more dangerous. He knew exactly who it was meant for. The unexpected visitee didn't reply right away. My husband was working late, buried under some urgent project at the office. The rain was heavy enough that no one would drop by casually. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, David was standing there, rain dripping from his hair, his jacket clinging to his shoulders. He looked like he'd walked straight out of a scene I wasn't ready to be in. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said, stepping inside before I could answer. I should have told him it wasn't a good time. I should have called my husband, but instead, I just closed the door and tried to ignore the way my heart was racing. The conversation that wasn't about words. We sat in the kitchen, a pot of coffee between us. "I was nearby," he said, "and the rain started." I figured, why not? Why not? 2 words that could unravel an entire marriage. We talked, at least we used words. But underneath, there was an entirely different conversation happening. A conversation in the way his eyes lingered on mine a second too long. In the way my fingers brushed his when I handed him a mug. It wasn't about coffee. It wasn't even about catching up. It was about acknowledging what had been building since that dinner. The moment everything shifted, the storm outside grew louder, rattling the windows. I stood to get more sugar for the coffee, and when I turned back, David was closer than before. "You know," he said quietly, "I didn't just come here because of the rain." My breath caught. "I came because I couldn't stop thinking about you," he continued. The room seemed to shrink. The sound of my heartbeat drowned out the rain. This was the moment, the point, where everything could tip one way or the other. I told myself I would step back, that I would draw a line. But instead, I stood there, frozen, my pulse roaring in my ears. The kiss, I don't know who moved first. All I know is that one moment we were standing apart, and the next his lips were on mine. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was urgent, like a dam breaking after too much pressure. For a few breathless seconds, the world disappeared. The rain, the kitchen, the guilt, all of it drowned in the heat of that moment. And then, as quickly as it began, I pulled away. "This can't happen," I said, my voice shaking. He nodded, but there was no regret in his eyes. Only a quiet certainty. The aftermath. David left soon after, the rain still pounding against the roof as the door closed behind him. I stood there for a long time, my fingers still tingling, my lips still warm. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, just a mistake, a slip in judgment. But I knew better. It was the kind of moment you can't take back, the dash from before. It was gone now, replaced by something irreversible. The twist. 2 nights later, my husband came home early. I was in the kitchen when I heard him talking on the phone, his voice low but tense. "Yeah," he said. "She doesn't suspect a thing. We'll tell her after the weekend." The words hit me like ice water. I froze, listening. "Yes, I saw him," my husband continued. "He said she seemed interested." "That's good. Makes it easier. Easier. Interested." When he hung up, I forced myself to walk into the living room like I hadn't just heard the end of my own world. The truth comes out later that night. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Who were you talking to earlier?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment, just long enough for the truth to spill through the cracks. "David," he said, finally. "We've been working on something together. A surprise for you." I waited. He looked away, his voice tightening. "I wanted to see if you'd fall for him. Just a little. I wanted to see if you could be tempted." I felt the room tilt. Why? Because, he said, "I've been offered a job overseas. And I needed to know if I could trust you to wait for me." David was helping me test that. A lie. Didn't know what was worse, the kiss I hadn't planned or the fact that my husband had orchestrated the entire situation. That David hadn't just shown up in the rain by chance. That every glance, every lingering look had been part of a plan. A plan to test me. "You set me up," I whispered. He didn't deny it the final break that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The rain long gone, but the storm inside me, raging trust. Once cracked, never goes back to the way it was. And love, real love, doesn't come with traps. I thought about the dash again, how it had been a pause. It's a space where anything could happen. And it had. Just not in the way I ever could have imagined. The dash in the title isn't just punctuation. It's a breath you don't know you're holding. The shift in the air right before a storm. It's the moment after David left, when the sound of the closing door echoed in my mind longer than it should have. It's the space between everything is fine and something just changed. The residual presence when my husband returned to the living room after walking David out. I was still standing by the table, holding an empty wine glass like it had something important to tell me. The candlelight had dimmed to soft embers, casting the room in a gold-dan shadow haze. "He hasn't changed at all," my husband said cheerfully, tossing himself onto the couch. "Same old David still tells those ridiculous stories." I nodded, setting the glass down, but my mind wasn't replaying David's stories. It was replaying moments that hadn't been said aloud. The look he gave me while I was serving dessert, the quiet I always wondered how you were doing. The dash was already forming in my mind, that invisible pause where everything in life stops making perfect sense. That night later, after the dishes were done and my husband had fallen asleep, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The night was too quiet. My thoughts were too loud. I told myself it was nothing. David was just being friendly. That's all. But then I remembered how he had stood just a little too close while drying dishes, the warmth of his shoulder brushing mine. I remembered the way his eyes seemed to search mine, like there was something unsaid that he was daring me to acknowledge. And I remembered that I hadn't stepped away. That's where the dash lives, in that space between acknowledging and denying. The next morning life tried to slip back into its usual rhythm. Coffee brewing, sunlight pooling across the kitchen counter. The sound of my husband flipping through the morning news on his phone. But even the coffee tasted different that morning, sharper, somehow, like it was brewed with thoughts I couldn't quite swallow. "David said he might call you this week," my husband mentioned casually, not looking up from his phone. I froze. "Me? Yeah," he said. I told him you know more about the new restaurant openings in town than I do. Thought you could give him some recommendations before he leaves? It was harmless, rational, completely normal. And yet, in my mind, that single statement became another dash, another pause where my heart skipped for reasons I didn't want to explore. The unspoken replay that day. I kept replaying the dinner like a scene in a movie you don't want to admit you've memorized. The way David's laughter had filled the room, deep and effortless. The way his voice dropped slightly when he spoke to me. The fact that my husband hadn't noticed any of it. There's a strange kind of danger in things that go unnoticed. You can hide them more easily. You can nurture them without consequence. At least for a while. That's what the dash represents. Not action, but the dangerous potential for it. The call it came 2 days later. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. David, husband's friend. The parentheses suddenly feeling like a boundary line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. "Hey, his voice said when I answered. Smooth, casual. But there was something about the way he lingered on the word, like he'd been waiting for me to pick up. We talked about the restaurants, about his short stay in town. But woven between those harmless details were threads of something else. You know, he said at one point, you're not how I remembered. You're more. More what? I didn't ask, but the silence that followed was thick enough to answer. The question in ways words never could. That pause, the dash, was stretching, pulling me into something I knew I shouldn't explore. The subtle shift at home after the call. I moved through the house like nothing had happened. I made dinner. I laughed at my husband's joke about a coworker. I kissed him goodnight, but there was a new layer beneath everything. It's a subtle hum, like a song you can't hear clearly, but still recognize. The dash was no longer just a pause. It was becoming a crack, space big enough for something to slip through. What the dash really means, the dash in a sentence connects to ideas, but also separates them. That's what this moment in my life felt like, a separation between the version of me that existed before David walked in for dinner and the version that was emerging after it. It wasn't about cheating or betrayal or anything physical. Not yet. It was about the awareness that something could happen. It was about knowing the possibility was there and feeling the pull toward it. The text message a week after dinner. My phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't a call. I walked past that cafe you mentioned. Made me think of you. No question. No invitation. Just a statement, heavy with implication. I stared at it for far too long before typing back. Did you go in? Another dash. Another pause where meaning lived between the lines. Living in the dash by then, I realized I was living entirely. In that pause, I thought about David while cooking dinner, while shopping for groceries. While lying awake at night, I thought about what might happen if the dash ended, if the pause gave way to action. It's not that I wanted to betray my husband. It's that the part of me I thought was settled, predictable, and safe was suddenly restless. And restlessness has a way of making you notice things you used to ignore. The way the world feels brighter when you're keeping a secret. The way your pulse quickens when a name lights up your phone. The way you measure time, not in hours, but in moments between contact. The choice the dash is dangerous because it feels harmless. It's just a pause, just a space. But in that space, you can rewrite entire chapters of your life in your mind before anything has actually happened. And by the time you realize you've been standing in it too long, it's already pulled you in. That's where I was, in the middle of that pause, knowing that the next part of the story wasn't going to be ordinary, because the dash always leads somewhere. And deep down, I already knew where this one was headed. The calm before the storm dinner was never supposed to be an event in our home. For me, it was a routine, chopping onions while the faint hum of the fridge filled the kitchen, stirring a pot while the smell of herbs wrapped around the walls, and waiting for my husband to come home, tie loosened, shoulders heavy from work. It was ordinary, predictable, safe. That's why I didn't expect that night to feel different. It started with a phone call. My husband's voice, unusually cheerful, spilled through the receiver. "Guess who I ran into today?" he said, excitement lacing his words. Before I could answer, he continued, "David. Remember David? From college." I did remember David, vaguely. I'd met him only once, years ago, at a crowded alumni event where laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. He had been charming, not in a loud, boastful way, but in the kind of way that made you feel like the only person in the room when he looked at you. I didn't think much of it then. "He's in town for a few days," my husband went on. "I invited him over for dinner tonight. Hope that's okay." It was okay. At least, that's what I told myself. I liked the idea of my husband reconnecting with old friends. Marriage has its lulls, its unspoken silences, and sometimes a familiar. Face can light up the corners of a room that have been dim for too long. The arrival by the time the doorbell rang. The table was set. Candles glowed softly, their flames dancing in rhythm with the slow jazz playing from the kitchen speaker. I opened the door, expecting a polite handshake, maybe a warm smile. Instead, I was met with a hug. David's arms wrapped around me in a way that was both familiar and unfamiliar. Not too long, but just long enough to notice. His cologne was different from what I remembered, deeper, warmer, with a hint of something woodsy. He pulled back, his eyes scanning my face for a second. Longer than necessary. "Wow," he said with a grin. "You haven't changed a bit." It was a harmless comment, on the surface, but there was something in his tone, not flirty, not exactly, but laced with a kind of knowing. I brushed it off. Settling in dinner began easily enough. My husband and David slipped into their old rhythm, talking about professors, late-night study sessions, and inside jokes I didn't understand. I laughed when appropriate, passed the breadbasket, and sipped my wine. But somewhere between the main course and dessert, I noticed something. David's attention wasn't just on my husband. He'd listen intently when I spoke, leaning forward slightly as if my words carried a weight he needed to catch before they fell. When I laughed, his eyes softened, almost like he was storing the sound away for later. I told myself I was imagining it. The atmosphere shifts, was when my husband got up to take a call in the other room that I truly noticed the shift. Suddenly, the air felt thicker. The candlelight seemed to flicker differently. "It's nice, you know," David said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Seeing you again. I always wondered how you were doing." I smiled politely, unsure where the conversation was heading. "You and my husband go way back," I said, trying to keep the focus on their friendship. He smirked. "We do, but I remember you more than you think." That made me pause. There was something deliberate about the way he said it, like he wanted me to ask what he meant. I didn't. Not yet. Small observations, it's strange how you can notice 100 little things without meaning to. The way he tapped his fingers on the table when my husband spoke, as though impatient for him to finish. The way his gaze dropped briefly to my hands when I reached for my wine. The way his voice lowered. Whenever he addressed me directly, it wasn't inappropriate, not in action. But there was an undertone, a quiet, unspoken suggestion in the spaces between our words. Memories surfaces, the conversation flowed. Pieces of that alumni event years ago started coming back to me. I remembered standing by the bar, a little out of place among strangers, when David had walked up. Remembered him making me laugh within minutes, leaning in to hear me over the noise, his hand brushing my arm just slightly. And I remembered my husband, across the room, missing most of our interaction. I had forgotten all about that moment, or maybe I'd chosen to forget. Until now, the lingering dinner when dinner ended. I expected David to leave soon after. But he didn't. He lingered, offering to help clear the table, drying dishes beside me while my husband searched for an old photo album in the other room. "It's good to see you happy," he said quietly. His tone was genuine, but there was something else beneath it, something that made my heartbeat quicken. "Thank you," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment it felt as if the kitchen had grown smaller, the air warmer, and just like that, my husband walked back in, laughing about a picture he'd found. The spell, if that's what it was, broke. Closing the evening, by the time David finally left, the night air had cooled. He hugged my husband, then turned to me. "It was really nice seeing you again," he said, his voice low. "Likewise," I managed as the door closed behind him. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I told myself it was just dinner, nothing more. But deep down, I knew better. Dinner had been the start of something I couldn't yet name, but could already feel simmering beneath the surface.